This is more than I thought would be here this morning. Doug Abbott texted me yesterday. He said, I think you're going to be preaching to me and Jen and your wife. So this is way more than that. Hi, Vino. How are you, buddy? We welcome all of you at home watching. We're sorry so many people are sick, and we pray God's mercy and healing on you. It's cool. There are a lot of people do watch online, people in our church, a lot of people that don't go to our church. I just found out from a Christmas card that my dear cousin Kim and her sister Shelly both watch up in the Sacramento area. So blessings to both of my sweet cousins. Apparently there's a new setting on our heater here, as Tim said, and I kept reading it, and I have the same control system at home. There's off, there's auto, there's hot, there's cold, and the new setting we found is hospital. This is as cold as it is in the hospital. We didn't do this on purpose. This isn't a COVID joke. It's probably working for that, I suppose, but I still took my vest off. I took my vest off to make you feel warmer. Is it working? Tim, is it working for you? Yes. Because I do always sweat. By the way, Andy and I duck hunted. Well, you wouldn't call it a duck hunt. Andy and I sat and drank coffee yesterday and pretended to duck hunt. And I had the greatest breakfast burrito I've ever had in my entire life. Cheryl Lawrence made us this breakfast burrito. And I just kept going on. I had to take my hat off. I was sweating all over. And Andy kept looking at me and laughing. And I kept bragging about this breakfast burrito. And finally, Andy took a bite. He goes, "Oh my gosh, you're not kidding. What's this meat in here? This is more than bacon." I think it was chorizo. Was it chorizo?
It was bacon, ham, and sausage.
Bacon, ham, and sausage. She's trying to kill me. They would like requests in the audience for your burrito, but only those who are in attendance. This is quite a story that Tim just read for us this morning out of John 5. So much we're going to take the next 3 weeks to unpack chapter 5. This morning I'm going to go through the healing story of this man, and then the next 2 weeks we'll unpack what the meaning is of it, because it's often in John he does something the other gospel writers don't do. He'll say, this is what happened. Now this is why he said it, or this is why he did it. We'll see the same thing in chapter 6 in just a few weeks. And remember, at the end of the gospel, John tells us he chose certain miracles to share in this gospel. He said specifically that there's supposed to be a sign. There are actually 7 signs, or 7 miracles, if you will. This is actually number 3. Jeremy, for no coordination effort at all, he actually covered the first 2, the turning the water into wine at Cana, and then the healing of the official son. And this morning, we will look at the healing of this man at the pool of Bethesda. And John numbered the first one, and he numbered the second sign. He stops numbering them because he assumes his audience is at least bright enough to count. So we'll have to do the counting from here on out. So here's how I want to kind of tackle this third sign. I want to go through 4 things. I want to look at what we learned from the pool. I want to look at what we learned from the man, or learn about the man. I want to look at what we learn about Jesus, and then we'll look at what we learn about ourselves. So let's start with what we learn from the pool itself. First of all, the passage starts by telling us it is really chilly. I may have to go back to the vest at some point. I can feel a certain level of chattering going on inside. I need a horse blanket. Yeah, you want to bring that up? I think I need the vest. I'm sorry, people. This is not about you anymore. This is about me. Thank you so much, Kyle. This will be better. The passage starts by telling us it is during a Jewish festival. This is what it says in chapter 5, verse 1. And after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And most people believe that the festival was Shavuot, or the great day of Pentecost that they celebrated. And it was the beginning of the grain harvest, which is why they celebrated it. And it was one of 3 Jewish festivals where every Israelite man was required to be present in Jerusalem at the temple. The Gospels record, it looks like 5 separate episodes where Jesus makes trips to Jerusalem, and they're all surrounded around a Jewish festival. The others are Passover, Sukkot, which is also known as the Feast of Booths, and Hanukkah. So the question is, why is this significant? The writers in the Gospels tell us something for a reason. Why do we need to know it's a festival, that it's the great Shavuot festival? Because the city of Jerusalem is swelling with people. And the more Jews there are, the more nervous the Romans get. And the more nervous the Romans get, the more nervous the Jewish leaders get. It's a circular nervousness. And this makes what Jesus does all the more significant and, quite frankly, questionable. So hold that in the back of your mind. Second of all, it says this took place in Jerusalem near the sheep's gate. It's where they brought the sheep in for the sacrifice at the temple. It's actually where they washed the sheep before they brought them up to the temple. It says it's near the sheep gate at a pool called Bethesda, surrounded by 5 covered porches or porticos. John 5:2. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. The pool is actually located on the northeastern side of Jerusalem, just above the temple, just north of the Temple Mount and the Antonia Fortress. And the pool is in this compound of the Church of St. Anne. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem, if you've ever been to St. Anne's, it's unbelievable. The church is just like another really cool church. But you go in this church, here's why it's fabulous. This is almost the 8th sign that John didn't write about. When I stood in the middle of St. Anne's and I sang, I sounded incredible. Brian was there. Brian and Brian's got, as you all know, an amazing voice. I could sing a solo in St. Anne's. And you get in there and you almost sound like a choir by yourself. And I don't think they did it on even purpose. I think it was an accident, the way your voice bounces off this massive rocks in this church. So this is where this pool is located in the Muslim quarter. And you can still have an amazing appreciation for this archaeological site, despite all the Byzantine and Crusader walls preserving the site. The pool itself is literally over 100 feet deep. It's massive. And it was an important water reservoir. There was a spring that actually fed the water in this reservoir for the residents on the north side of Jerusalem in Jesus' day. Some texts call it a stoa or a royal stoa, a roofed colonnade, meaning there's no walls but only columns. And they would sit in the shade under a porch and then go into the pool. And interestingly enough, in the 18th and 19th century, there was a whole deal with this modern historical scholarship, and they were trying to poke at the Bible and prove that the Bible was not accurate. And they looked at this chapter in the Gospel of John in particular. And these modern historians, they reasoned that since they couldn't find this massive structure in Jerusalem, it of course didn't exist. And since it didn't exist, the Bible was a very, very unreliable document. Thus, they reasoned John couldn't have been an eyewitness, and thus his whole gospel needed to be thrown out like the rest of the scriptures. And of course, archaeology discovered remnants of this pool in the 19th century. And in 1964, actually not that long ago, they discovered the Byzantine and Crusader churches that were built on top of the pool, thus concealing the pool, which is why they couldn't see it. There's a great theologian named F.F. Bruce that some of you may have read before. He wrote these very critical New Testament documents about the reliability of Scripture. And he used this pool, the pool of Bethesda, to prove the authenticity of the Bible. And so often what happens in the Holy Land is if there's a holy site, if there was a place where a very, very significant thing took place, they'd build a church right on top of it. It was neat because they would mark it as holy. The problem was you could never see the site again because there was a church over it. And they discovered when they unearthed all this, these 2 basins, or these 2 separate parts divided by a ridge of rock and 5 porches. And it was finally destroyed when the Romans sacked Israel between 66 and 70 AD. So they then knew that John had to be an eyewitness because no one would have known this pool was even in Jerusalem unless they lived before 70 AD. Number 3, it was reputed to have these weird, like mystical healing qualities. Interestingly enough, our text sometimes translates that an angel stirred the waters, but that's really a very misleading translation. John 5:3 says this, "In these lay multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed." Verse 7, "The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going another step down, somebody steps in before me.'" Legend has it that the water would stir somehow without any wind, and they're not sure how or honestly even if, but many people staked their lives on it and laid by this pool waiting for healing. So something obviously must have been happening. Most people believe now that there was a spring that actually did feed this pool, and it was simply the spring bubbling up underneath, which springs do in all kinds of water reservoirs. And they would see the water bubble up, think it was a mystical thing that was taking place, and they would try to get in. And we look at this kind of thing and we go, this is ridiculous. Like, who would buy this kind of thing? I was listening to KNBR just this week, and there were two, there's two guys interviewing this one 49ers guy. And the 49ers guy made this statement about the 49ers game today and something about something. I wasn't even paying attention. I don't even know why I was on my radio. And then he says this statement, knock on wood. And you're listening to this, you're going, you're a full-fledged adult. I mean, who believes this? And yet we do this, we say this, it's just nonsense. In Jerusalem, there's a very amazing, just like crazy structured church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And they believe this is where Jesus was actually crucified. And there's a slab of stone in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the first time I went in there, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I was watching this slab, and people were crowding around the slab, and they were rubbing things on the slab. And they were rubbing their keys on it. They were rubbing handkerchiefs and pieces of their shirt. And they were kissing the rock and rubbing their face on the slab. And I was just like, what is going on here? Talking about germs, people. This is disgusting. Well, they believed that Jesus' dead body was laid on that slab, and therefore the slab is holy. It's touched God, so if I can just rub something on that, I can take that good luck home with me, and then it will rub off on the rest of my life. That's what's going on here, the kind of superstition. Here's why I'm bringing this up. There was actually a temple built at this pool to the Greco-Roman god Asclepios. Again, the legend was that the pagan god Asclepios was the one that would stir up the waters. And then, of course, the first one to enter the waters, once the bubbling started, was healed. The Greco-Roman god Asclepios was important because it isn't entirely who this Jewish man was waiting for. Was he waiting for the Jewish god, Yahweh, to heal him? Or was he looking for the pagan Greco-Roman god Asclepios? I would argue strongly it was the pagan god, for reasons that will come out in a little bit. But I'm going to let everybody else decide how you want to decide as we go through this passage this morning. The bottom line is this. This is a pagan pool. This is not a Jewish pool. This is not a Christian pool. Can you ever imagine our great God behaving like this? What a cruel game this is to me. Making the infirmed race into a pool to be the first, knowing, by the way, they can't get there because most of them are paralyzed. That's a sick game that our God would never do. Finally, overshadowing the pool was the Grand Antonio Fortress and on the north end of the Temple Mount. The fortress housed an entire garrison of Roman troops stationed there to keep the peace. So you can imagine this pool wasn't a place you wanted to stir up unrest at all. It's overlooking the pool, and it's very high up. You don't want to stir up rest at this pool, unless, of course, you're Jesus. So here's Jesus on one of the busiest days, the most stressful time in Jerusalem, the time when peacekeeping was at the height in Jerusalem, on the Sabbath, healing this guy under the noses of the temple and all the priests and the Pharisees and the Roman garrison. Jesus is on purpose stirring the mud. This is way, way bigger than him just healing somebody. Now, for that piece, you'll have to come back in here next week why I think that is. Well, what do we learn about the man? That's what we learned about the pool. What do we learn about the man? We know very little from this passage about this man's past from the text. So we have to kind of surmise what we can from his reactions and his words. First of all, we know he is lame and has been for some time. Verse 5, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. We really have no idea, by the way, what caused it. Invalid simply means unable to walk. We also don't know if he is 38 years old and he was born this way at birth, or if something happened in his life and then now he's been there as an invalid for 38 years. Either way, he couldn't walk for decades and he's laying there hoping. Jesus throws in this weird twist in verse 14 when he comes back, sees the guy, and he tells the guy, oh, by the way, don't sin anymore. It's kind of a weird statement. And it's possible he was injured by something in his life, but again, Jesus also might be referring to more about his approach to his healing than anything else. Jesus makes it infinitely clear just in a few chapters later, in chapter 9, that there's not sin in this guy's life because he's under some curse from his parents. And we'll see this on the blind guy in chapter 9. But again, we'll let this unfold for yourself and we'll see if you see the same thing I do. But I think what we do see is the next thing, which is this guy is clearly mixing pagan thought into his faith. We already know this is a pagan pool. So why is this guy here? He is mixing, in my opinion, culture with faith. And as I just mentioned, Jesus in verse 14 says, sin no more. See, this is way beyond just like, wow, I think he made a mistake. I think there's a link in what he's doing, but I think it's even more than that he's at a pagan pool and mixing this ugly pagan culture with his faith. I think this guy is a victim. And I think this guy has a victim mentality that Jesus wants to drive out of him. So what is a victim? When my son was in high school, he was a senior, and around his junior year, he decided it was oat sowing time. And so he had a really, really good time for the last 2 years of high school and the first 2 years of college in particular. And by the second semester of his senior year, if any of you have raised kids, you know this is one of the worst times in life. Junior hires are not fun. A second semester senior in high school who's beginning to decide he wants to sow oats is just an awful time because they're so belligerent and don't care and they just do whatever they want. And he got in trouble for the 30,000th time, and he's standing in my garage, and I looked at my son and I said, take the keys out of your pocket, your truck keys, put them on the counter, they're mine. And he said to me, you might as, I just love this, and he's okay with me telling this story, by the way. I would love to tell you what he did, but I will not tell you. It's a fantastically horrible story. He said to me these words. He said, you've already taken everything else. You might as well take my truck. And I said, oh, no, great son of mine. I have taken nothing from you. You have taken all of that. You have taken your senior trip away. You have taken your truck away. You have taken going out away. You took all of that away from yourself. There are no victims in our family. And with the only clarity he'd had in 2 years, he looked at me and said, you're totally right. Do you constantly feel as though you have no control over situations or that other people are just out to get you? Do you feel as though bad things keep happening to you no matter what you do? If you find yourself blaming other people for events or situations in your life, you have a victim mindset. People with a victim mentality feel as though bad things keep happening and the world is against them. You might even think thoughts like, what did I do to deserve this? You might also feel resentful a lot of the time. Now, why do I say that about this guy by the pool? First, I think you can see it in his explanation. Second of all, think you can see it in the way he blames other people for his life. Listen to what it says again in verse 6. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be well?" The sick man said, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am going, another steps down before me." Look what happens when this guy is healed, by the way. Jump down to verse 9. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered, "The man who healed me, that man." That's the inflection. "That man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" This is very unique, by the way, in the four Gospels. Again, let's reference the blind guy again in chapter 9 of John that gets healed by Jesus, what he said. When they tried to figure out who the guy was that actually healed him and what happened, his first reaction was, first of all, "I am the guy," not "it's Jesus' fault." Listen to John chapter 9, verse 10. So they said to the blind guy that was healed, "Then how were your eyes open?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and I received my sight." You see, this guy speaks of his miracle rather than to simply stay out of trouble. In fact, as you read the rest of the chapter, he boldly stands up for Jesus. Listen to this in Luke chapter 18, verse 41. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus says. He says, "Lord, let me receive my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Recover your sight, your faith has made you well." And immediately his sight was recovered and followed him, and he glorified God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. Notice, not, "Lord, no one will help me into the pool," or "Lord, nobody cares about me." There's no Eeyore in any of these other stories. No, what they say is, "Lord, heal me no matter what the cost is." You see, I personally think this guy is choosing the devil he knows. The reaction he is going with is the one he's familiar with, even if it's an unhealthy reaction. It looks like an easier path to lay there blaming others. And honestly, it is for a while. You have been a beggar for decades. If healed, you will have to put your livelihood will be stripped away from you because no one will give alms to a healthy person. Are you ready for the new responsibilities that will come with healing? With real life course change? See, this is what I think Jesus is asking. This is Jesus' call to move out of victimhood and into health, changing, healing, growing. See, it feels way worse at first whenever we have to pick up and change and create a new pattern or a way of thinking, but it's way easier in the long run. There's a series, this is a series on its own that I could teach just on victimhood, but we'll have to stick to kind of what we're doing. But it's important, I think, because right now we have a victim culture. I'm already hearing people. We have a very coddled society. Empathy without discipline and negative repercussions never works. We can't just love people by just giving everything to them when there's no negative repercussion to it. If you did this with your children, you would destroy them by how we spoil them. This is an ancient understanding in the Bible. It is victimology that we should ask nothing of people. And what happens in the end is they lose their dignity. And finally, I don't think this guy is seeking Jesus as his Messiah and Lord, which I know is a very grand statement from what little we see. But I'll let you come to your own conclusion. Notice there is no "Lord, help me." In fact, Jesus has to approach him. This is totally unique, by the way, in the four Gospels with healing. I know it's true. If we ever find God, it's because God was searching for us first. But in every other example, in all four Gospels, people ask Jesus for help, not the other way around. The Syrophoenician woman, remember what she said? "Lord, have mercy upon me." Remember, he referred to her as a dog, and she said, even the dogs can eat the scraps from the Lord's table. The blind guy in Jericho, son of David, have mercy on me. The hemorrhaging woman, remember what she did? She defiled the entire crowd because she'd been hemorrhaging and she was impure, to go up and just grab the cloak of Jesus from behind, and on and on and on in the scriptures it goes like this with healings, but not here. So why is this important? Because I think this guy wants Jesus to simply be a means to an end. He's willing to partner with Jesus, of course. He wants help. But what I hear is, help me get what I want so I can get on with my life. Rather than, you are my security, Jesus. You will become my significance. I want you, Jesus. Instead, I want you, Jesus, to fix my problem in front of me. In Psalm 43, I just love what the psalmist says. To God, he says, to God, my exceeding joy, right? My exceeding joy. Not, you can help me find my joy, God. To God, who is my exceeding joy. Well, then what do we learn about Jesus in this story? I mentioned how unique the story is, and that Jesus has to approach him rather than in desperation, this guy reaching out to Jesus. Well, there's another really unique thing in this story. How does the story end? And what I mean by that is, what became of this guy? You know, it's a little bit like the story of the prodigal. Remember when the son comes home, the dad welcomes them, the older brother's all ticked off? Nobody knows how the parable ended. We don't know if the older brother came to his senses. It's the same thing here. I remember a few weeks ago with the Samaritan woman, when Jesus spoke to her, she immediately dropped her jar and she ran back into town and she told all of the people that hated her and ostracized her and marginalized her about the love of Jesus. How about the guy with the legion of demons? Remember the guy that on the other side of the Sea of Galilee in the east in the Decapolis? In Mark chapter 5, this is what it says in verse 16. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged Jesus that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has shown mercy on you. Verse 20, and he went away and began to proclaim in the whole of Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled at Jesus. So you can see both reactions in this little teeny story. The people are freaked out by Jesus. He just drove a legion of demons, threw them into swine of pigs who ran off a cliff and into the sea. And they go, Jesus, we need you to leave. You're freaking us out. But the dude, all he wants is to stay with and be next to the one that healed him. And then when he can't go with him, he can't stop praising his name. You never see in this guy, in our story this morning, gratitude or praise or sharing about him anywhere in the story. And I suppose it's totally possible that it happened. Maybe the gospel writer left it off, and it's totally possible, I know that. But in my opinion, the man does not really believe. He doesn't take Jesus in, which, if that's actually true, is a really lousy deal. Look what Jesus just did for this guy, right? 38 years this guy has been an invalid. And Jesus says, get up. And he's healed. Remember the rich young ruler? Remember? He left depressed because he was more worried about what he would give up than what he would gain in Jesus. This guy this morning was more worried about getting in trouble than he was honoring Christ. He was more worried about what he needs in the moment than what Jesus can offer in a lifetime. He was more concerned with the earthly, obvious things than the true relational hole in his heart that Jesus could finally fill. And yet, and here it is. Jesus still loved this guy, despite his lack of response. This is grace. This is what we sang about before the message. This is what we read about in chapter 1 of John's gospel, John 1:14, I think the most amazing verse in all of Scripture. And the Word, meaning capital W, the Word, the Logos, became flesh, and he dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. We have seen his glory. That means we know what God is really like. That's what that means. We saw Jesus in his time on earth, and now we know what God is like. John 1:16, and from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. You see, anybody can love somebody that loves them back, right? Anybody can do that, but that's not what we see with Jesus. He healed this guy willingly and lovingly with apparently no response from him. This is what we learn about Jesus, and thus this is what we learn about God. His grace is not tied to a response. In spite of this, Jesus doesn't say, no, I'm not doing it. He says, get up. I'll still help you. I still want to throw grace all over you. Ephesians 1:7, in him, in Christ, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to, here it is, the riches of his grace, which he lavished upon us. Lavish means over and above. It's just this overwhelming, overflowing outpouring for the undeserved. This is what Jesus is like, and he's always like this. Do you have someone in your life that for the life of you, you can't figure out why God keeps blessing? Come on. A family member, a neighbor, a friend. You can't figure out why God keeps blessing them. It can be frustrating at times. It might even be you. I feel like this a lot. This is why it is who he is. He's a lavisher. He loves in an overwhelming, overflowing, outpouring way. We want him to be this for us. We need Jesus to be this for us. But if he's this way for us, that means he's also this way for the one you also decided doesn't deserve this, or doesn't think like you, or doesn't act like you. And he does this with or without a response, because that is his glory. That is his reality. That is what he is like to his core. You know, I was writing this sermon and thinking about this, and I was struck in my mind with the scene at the Last Supper. Do you know, in the scene in the Last Supper, before a lot of things took place, Jesus takes off his outer cloak and he fills a basin with water and he washes the disciples' feet one by one, in between their toes, the mud and the grime, and he washes them. And there is Judas Iscariot. And Jesus washes this guy's feet. His feet are still damp when Jesus looks him in the eye and says, what you do, do quickly. Who does that? Let me tell you, I don't do that very well. Right? We live in a time where we're being tested to do this well. There are so many people that it's so easy for you and I to say, like, and to use Brian's phrase a month or so ago, they're them. They're not us. They're on the other side of the aisle. They're on the other side of the political spectrum. They're on the other side of the thinking. And there sits Judas with his feet dripping with the cloth and the water that Jesus just washed. And Jesus looks at him and says, what you do, do quickly. I think that's just beautiful. Well, what do we learn from this? I just want to mention three things, and I'll be very brief. First of all, what God are we looking for in our lives? A God that is a means to an end, or simply him? Is Jesus your exceeding joy? Or do we find ourselves just going to Santa Jesus to fix the next problem? And oh, by the way, he has asked us to ask him about all of our problems. So I'm not correcting that. We are commanded to say everything in our life that we need, let's go to him. But is that all we're doing? Or are we taking him in as our exceeding joy? Are we captivated simply by the fact that we have a relationship with him every single day? If we are not, we will look like the world. There's your wrestle. There's my wrestle every day. Am I captivated by Jesus in my life? Not captivated by the news, not captivated by the rightness and the wrongness, not captivated by the criticality and the judgment and the lack of morality and all the things that can captivate us so easily. Am I captivated by Jesus? Second of all, are we willing to lay down the familiar and walk out a new life with Jesus? There are no victims in Christianity. Now, there are, unfortunately, but there are no victims in Christianity. We are safe. We're safe to be wrong. We're safe to mess up. We're safe to struggle, changing. We have literally no actual reason of reality to not lean into our own brokenness. We have no reason not to ask truth-telling people to speak into our life if we are missing something. We should all be doing this. Am I missing something? Is my heart getting hard? Am I going astray? Am I being drawn away from the eyes of Christ? It is our brokenness that Jesus uses to heal this world. So, be brave and relax and allow his lavish love to change you. And lean into your own dysfunction. Lean into your fear. Lean into your kind of typical way of responding to people and say, Jesus, I want to act differently. And finally, are we an extension of Jesus' lavish love to the world? Anyone can love people that love them back. Anybody can do that. The scriptures tell us that. But ours is an overwhelming, overflowing love unto others. Jesus' lavish treatment of us is what should affect our life. When you woke up this morning, did you wake up to an anxious list? This is a Doug description, by the way. Did you wake up to a frustrated thought? Did you wake up with anger or criticality or judgment? Or did you wake up with gratitude for the one that lavishly loves you and walks with you every single day? If you wake up tomorrow and you try to lavishly love this world, you will fall flat on your face. But if you wake up tomorrow and think about Jesus washing Judas's feet, when he was at the moment of betrayal to turn Jesus in for the worst torture that Rome could come up with, that will change your heart. And suddenly the news won't sour you. The difference of opinion won't throw you. Nothing will cause your eyes to change and your heart to grow dim if you remember the water dripping off that man's feet. And by the way, he has done the same for you and I. He washes our feet every single day. Let's pray.